So I just wanted to start by just introducing us to the topic that today we're going to focus on conditional cash transfers. And conditional cash transfers are somewhat of an interesting policy. 15, 20 years ago, we wouldn't actually be talking about conditional cash transfers. They were really on the margin of the types of policies that we were adopting in countries to try to alleviate poverty and try to improve outcomes of families in poverty. But now, there's some people have referred to it as a quiet revolution. And 15 years later, we have conditional cash transfer programs throughout much of Asia, throughout much of Africa, throughout most of Latin America. And our focus today is going to be on 2 programs in Latin America. As you think about these programs, there's a number of different things that they're trying to accomplish, and hopefully our speakers will talk a little bit about that. And when we talk about the discussion, we can talk about both some of the direct goals and indirect goals of these programs. The key thing is that what we're going to do here is talk about programs that are providing money to families, but those monies are based on conditions that the family must meet. And typically, those conditions are going to be education and health related, but we'll talk more specifically about some of those. One of the things that's also interesting about conditional cash transfers, unlike many of the other policies that have been adopted throughout the world, is the evidentiary base that we use for conditional cash transfers has been quite different. We've used experiments and quasi-experiments from the beginning of these programs to try to understand the overall effects of these programs. And so there's a rich evidentiary base which has affected the likelihood of this being accepted in other countries and adopted elsewhere. The other thing that's unique about conditional cash transfers from an academic point of view is its appeal to so many different disciplines. If you talk to different academics, economists like I am, we love to call conditional cash transfers our own, but it certainly has applications in sociology, in psychology, health, education, political science. And there are certainly places where different elements of traditional cash transfers have been used in each of these respective fields as tests for specific theories, as ways for us understanding more and more about how families think about their situation and how they can try to improve it. And then, of course, one of the things that we'll come back to a little bit later is talking about the resilience politically. The conditional cash transfers have been one of the most successful programs, and there have been a variety of different political alliances and bases that have supported and kept the conditional cash transfer movement moving forward. So we'll come back and we'll talk some more about some of the big picture. We'll turn it over. Our first speaker, I believe, is going to be Alejandro Toledo. So President Toledo, we'll turn it over to you at this point, and we'll come back a little bit later. Thank you.
When I assumed the presidency in 2001, the economy was in recession, and consequently, we need to grow first in order to invest in the social programs that I was interested in. One of the central programs that I would direct to the extreme poor was the program Juntos, Together. We did not begin from zero because we already had seen the experience in Brazil, Bolsa Familia, or opportunities in Mexico. The target people were the extreme poor in the rural areas, women. The evidence from the World Bank have shown that each dollar invested in a woman in the poor areas has twice as much impact of that dollar in the education of their children. We decided to do the direct condition cash transfer to the extreme poor. Our difficulties was to identify who are really the true poor. Perhaps that was the most difficult task. But once we identified them, we decided to give them $30 a month for each woman poor in the rural areas. A number of people went there to identify who were the real poor. And once we did that, we began to do the infrastructure to transfer the cash to them. The conditions: women, extreme poor. If they were pregnant, they were supposed to have 2 prenatal checkups, 2 postnatal checkups. They had to do the vaccination to the children. And 4th, they have to take the children to school. If they comply with these requirements, we continue giving them for a year $30 a month. Well, $30 a month for that community was a lot of money, individually as well as cumulatively. And really, the impact was enormous. The World Bank has done an evaluation of the programs of this direct cash transfer, and they have found that the impact that they had, not only in taking people, but the impact on it was very significant. Now, the philosophy of this project was not a permanent state policy. They have to graduate from extreme poverty to begin a micro or small entrepreneurship. What we have found that the women who have received this direct cash transfer had invested a substantial portion of what they have received in the education of the children. And so, really, that was a great investment that we have done it, what Bolsa Familia have done it, what opportunities have done it in Mexico and in other countries. Poverty is still one of the greatest challenges in Latin America. But poverty could be reproduced through generations if we do not target to the variables that are associated with education. That is, access to potable water, sanitation, access to health care, and to education of quality. One of the greatest results that we have seen is that the children or the poor women came to the palace to show me that at the age of 12 years old was the first time that they have washed their mouth toothpaste. Never before they were able to do that. One of the second part was that they used to go to school, and the state, the government, had to assure that there was a school, that was a medical center where they had to do the prenatal checkups. The government needs to provide a public infrastructure so they can comply with the conditions that we have demanded. We have seen children today that are around 13 or 14 years old. Now, the program was implemented in 2005. So it's almost 7 years. And we already have seen children, young people who are now in secondary education that would never have had the opportunity to have access to that. So, in summary, the conditional cash transfer to the extreme poor, supervised by a commission, an independent commission, in order not to politicize the program. This is very important. This is very important, not to politicize. You don't give the $30 and ask them to be member of your political party. No. There was a commission that was led by a bishop in Peru of ability, and 13 other people from the private sector, from the public sector, from the education sector, and they supervised the implementation of the program. Now, I think that the condition cash transfer had enormous impact in that population on education. Of course, we began in the rural area. Now we have moved it to the urban area. And we have invested around $600 million, but the impact was enormous. Yet, I have to emphasize that in order for them to take advantage and to have significant impact in education, they also had to have access to potable water, sanitation, healthcare. Because if they get sick, if they don't take a potable water, they don't drink potable water, they won't perform well at school, independently of the conditions that we provide. So it's a combination of providing the cash transfer, but also the state has the responsibility to provide the availability of schools, the availability of potable water, of sanitation, and check up that they have complied with the vaccination of the children in order to prevent the possibility of them getting sick. Most of them are now graduating from the Juntos project and no longer receiving the $30. They are now engaged in micro and small entrepreneurship, and they continue going to school. And this is very encouraging.
In some sense, for the discussion today, what we wanted to try to do, and hopefully we'll figure out the technical difficulties that we're having, and so we can actually hear Hono's presentation. But I wanted to kind of review a few pieces of evidence on conditional cash transfers, just to kind of go through and get you thinking a little bit about some of the ways in which this affects individuals. And then I wanted to, at least in the short run, I'd like to just ask President Toledo a few questions about the program to hopefully bring out some other pieces about the information and the way in which decisions were made and the way in which it's been successful. So the first thing I just wanted to kind of do is go through a few different pieces of evidence. The first one is directly related to kind of poverty reduction. And one of the things about conditional cash transfers is we're targeting the poorest families across the world with these programs. And so, the most obvious thing is, are we somehow improving their economic mobility? Are we reducing poverty? And the answer here is absolutely yes. We have both short-run evidence as well as long-run evidence that suggests that families that have been offered some type of program like this, that the likelihood that they are in poverty as they move forward is reduced. The effect in some cases, in oportunidad, is actually quite large. Suggesting that there's been quite a bit of economic movement in those families over a longer run. Another issue is food security. One of the things we worry with these families, as President Toledo talked a little bit about the access to good water, but more generally just access to good nutrition, it's been considerably higher for these families. And then as part of that, it creates less vulnerability to different shocks that might actually occur in their lives, and actually has helped them to have more stability in terms of what they've been able to provide these families to their children. When you go into the specific ones, if those items are happening, then we should see other things happening in the children's lives. And so, for example, on the child nutrition, this is, I think, where some of the strongest evidence is. We've had randomized trials, we've had quasi-experimental trials, a lot of propensity score type matches that have all revealed very similar results. For example, in Colombia, what we find is that there's less incidence of sickness that have diarrhea. We find lower mother morbidity. We find higher birth weights amongst the women who are expecting. In some of the African countries, we're actually finding less incidence of HIV or AIDS as a result of families participating in this. And if you think about these outcomes, most of the time we're thinking about these outcomes, at least in terms of our evidence base right now, is we're identifying outcomes that have been linked in other literature from being short-run outcomes to being long-run outcomes. And so, for example, when we find that birth weights increase, we have a number of studies that suggest that birth weight actually is a predictor of long-run success. And so what we find is with this higher birth weight, we are projecting that there's going to be long-run effects, although we're still quite not there. As we look at some other outcomes, on the nutrition and the health side, that's one part of it. The education part is another part that President Belito talked about. And so far, as we look kind of globally, what our evidence is we find that first, students are going to school more. Now, in terms of long-run attainment, our best evidence is from Mexico so far, and that seems to suggest about an additional year of schooling attained for students. We have a little bit less evidence on the test scores. We are getting some evidence that suggests that their academic achievement is somewhat higher, but that's been a little bit slower in coming. We're finding more that it's getting the students in school and keeping them moving through, and it's making it to where their incidence of having to work as a child is going down in many parts of the country. So we're getting some very consistent evidence there. So far, in terms of long-run evidence, only the attainment out of Mexico is what we have. Some is emerging out of Brazil at this point, but it's more on the economic side. As we look on the economic side, the evidence we have so far is a little bit more limited, but it's starting to go. One of what we're finding is that there's a relationship between growth. As this money is put into their local communities, it's increasing the economy. There's this multiplier effect that if I receive money and I start to spend that money, then that's money that's going to be circulated around the economy. And so we see some evidence there. And the arguments and the logic, in some sense, at this point is a little stronger than the actual physical evidence we have on that, although more things are emerging. I've already mentioned economic mobility. Another one, which hopefully we'll come back to a little bit, is talking a little bit about the type of investments that families make. In these families, we're not talking about a lot of savings here. And this additional income improves their ability and improves the actual kind of capital and savings that they have to where they can try more entrepreneurial effort. And there's certainly some evidence out of Brazil that suggests that exactly that is happening, that some of these low-income families have been able to use Bolsa Escolar as a way of actually improving their economic outcomes through increased entrepreneurship. There's also a little bit of evidence emerging about female empowerment. And, for example, in Oportunidades, there's some evidence that suggests that because a lot of these transfers are directed not to the family, but to the female head of the family, to the female, the mother in the family, that mother it's changed her bargaining position within the family, and it's in some ways empowered her to make more economic decisions about the family and to influence the types of decisions that she's making jointly with her spouse. And there's some evidence that it's led to increased engagement on the male side in terms of investing in goods that are going to benefit the children. We don't have a lot of evidence on some of the other outcomes. In educational settings, we often find that improved education, improved health, improved income leads to lower crime rates. It has some other externalities that we often think about. And we don't have as much evidence there, although we think that there's a solid logic model suggesting that these CCTs. As we look forward to what's going to happen, I mean, so far we've gathered easy measures. It's easy to see who goes to school. We've got a lot of good biometric measures. Through surveys, we can measure people's health through different doctor's appointments and different other metrics. It's easy to measure their health, their height, their weight. So, for example, we tend to find that kids who participate in this program have about a centimeter more of height as a result of it. We can do some things to measure the poverty gap, and what will be interesting is, as over the next decade, we can expect to see a number of additional evaluations come out that help us understand not only the effects of these programs go into different contexts and perhaps attach different conditions, but also we can start to see the long-run evidence on how this affects the long-run outcomes of these children. In the case of Peru, we're 7 years into the program, and so we're in a situation where those kids haven't had a chance to grow up yet. But in Mexico, we're starting to get that evidence on the long run. So that'll be one of the interesting things that we come back to.
Okay, so the first thing I'd like to say is that I'd like to apologize for the problems we are having to contact you. Okay, so secondly, let's consider what the President already presented and also the other comments about the conditional cash transfer. In the case of Brazil, I think the most in Brazil we have a quite high coverage of basic education for children from 7 to 14 years old. However, when, especially for boys, at the age of 12, many things start to compete with the school when they reach that age. For girls, at the age of 14. In the case of the boys, we're talking about things like helping parents in the agriculture, and also some of the types of jobs in the urban areas. And for girls at the age of 14, domestic activities also can be some pregnancy or other any consequence of the teen pregnancy. So the importance of Bolsa Familia is in the same way as many other programs you can see, CCT programs in Latin America, where we have conditionalities for health and education, has been to prevent the school early. In the case of the boys, as I said, 12 and the girls 14. So they are staying in the school. It is really considerable. Unfortunately, I can't present the picture, the figures, but it's very important. You see in the poorest part of Brazil, Northeast, how important it is for keeping them in the school. But there is also another thing that we never mentioned, which I share, we observed in the study. It's the importance that this service has to change as well. It's not just about the attitude of the family, but it's also important because the school usually are not prepared to receive these students. They don't expect to have these students in the school because in some way there's a kind of arrangement where the kids start to leave and if they have some difficulties in learning or some things, they just leave the school, they go to the school. And because of the program, the school has to change in order to accommodate those students. It has also been important, the impact on institutionality. So the kind of entries we have in Brazil, it has been important, especially for children at the age 14 up to 17, for boys and girls. And also in terms of changing the procedures in the school for receiving the children. It's important the combination of the interaction with the health, especially vaccination, so preventing infectious disease, which is also important in terms of nutrition and about what happened in the school later. And also about nutrition itself, improving the food security for families has also improved the possibility of these students have better health and as a consequence of having different consequences of that poor health in the school. As you know, everyone knows it's important, especially if they are up to 3 years old, but also later. So if we look together, the articulation of improving health, improving nutrition, having access to different services because it's a stimulus to go there, and also a kind of stimulus for families keeping kids in the school. So we are the combination of all those dimensions has been important for better education. Now, in the country we are now in Brazil, we observe it because Bolsa Familia covers about 13 million families. So we are talking about 52 million people. And that it improved also the economic condition of the family. So as a consequence, we have 18 million people moved up in the social scale. But still, 60 million people remain, and half of them are children, remain in extreme poverty. So we changed the program again, articulating Bolsa Familia with 120 actions in as a kind of adult population, because we was focused on poor and extreme poor people, that extreme poor population. And that way, trying to combine different actions, considering if people live in the urban area or rural areas, considering also the age. In that way, we're trying to improve the achievements of Bolsa Familia. It has been important. We estimate that 10% of the poverty reduction in Brazil is due to Bolsa Familia alone. There is also other, determinants in the other, from the other programs, but Bolsa Familia itself is very important for poverty reduction. But it's now, because we are now after many years of the program, we have to go beyond. And to go beyond means identify most specific part of the population and articulating more in order to provide more complete or comprehensive set of interventions. So I stop here and I hope you could hear me until we can continue the seminar. Thank you.
So what I really want to do at this point is I want to actually ask some questions and try to get some responses, because there's a number of things we've talked about with both the programs, and I also just want to thank everyone for their patience with some of our technical difficulties, as well as thank those here in the room here at Stanford. We have this scurrying about of different people trying to figure out solutions, and so we appreciate everybody's patience and appreciated the presentations as well. I want to start by kind of having us step back a second and to ask the respective panelists if they can talk to us a little bit about what they think is the real problem. Now, I know that we talked a little bit about infrastructure being, and in Brazil we had a little bit more than we did in Peru, at least at the onset, and certainly that could mediate the factors. But where there was infrastructure existing, families were not using it prior to this. And I want to try to help us, I want to try to at least have a little bit of a discussion about, as those policies were being adopted, what was the perspective of the policymakers in terms of why families weren't using it? Was there a worry that they didn't know about it? Was there a worry that they didn't appreciate it? Why do you think that those families did not actually use the existing schools and health facilities that were available to them at the time? And so why don't we turn it over and let's see if President Toledo, are you able to give us a response to that?
Can you hear me well? Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Then, Professor Bettinger, I think you have touched several crucial issues related to this condition cash transfer. As you well know, there are evidence, both for Brazil, Mexico, and Peru, that for each year of increase of education, your income improves. That's pretty much clear. Secondly, the impact of this cash transfer has to do a lot with the effort from the part of the government to provide the infrastructure in order for the recipients of the cash transfer to comply with the conditions that we demand from them. If there is not medical cost, if there is not vaccination available, if there are not the teachers in the rural area, obviously they will not be able to comply with those conditions that we demand by giving them the cash transfer. My third point is, it is not sufficient to receive the cash transfer to have the availability of the infrastructure needed for them to comply with the conditions if we don't provide the issue of quality. The problem is not whether they have access to education or not. And in fact, the evidence shows that more kids from the poor family attend to the school. But if the quality of education is poor, the impact decreases considerably. My fourth point is that there are other variables associated with education, as I mentioned before, that has to do with the performance in education, such as potable water, sanitation, healthcare, and a good quality of education. So that's the other part of the equation. It's not just the cash transfer with the intention to reduce poverty, and by reducing poverty, having an impact in education, but the collateral variables are of vital importance, we have found out as we explored 7 years later what has been the impact of the program Juntos, or Together in Peru. I'm sure this is the same case in Brazil, in Colombia, in Mexico. But so the social programs that comes together with education, empirical evidence shows that the intellectual capacity of a child has to do early nutrition. Kids who have high levels of early malnutrition will perform very poorly at school. So nutrition is another factor. Healthcare is another factor. Potable water is another factor. And the quality of the education is vital. And as we know, yes, children could go to school, but the quality of education is very poor. That makes still a big differences between urban and rural education. I think that Professor Eric Benninger has touched these issues, but we need to measure later on how the community has dynamized their economy by receiving an amount of money, not only individually, but in the community. Now they are beginning to get together the mothers, 4 or 5 of them, and put a small business, because there is a considerable amount of money in the community, and they are not doing any longer agriculture activity for subsistence, but rather to sell it to the market. That's another side effect of the cash transfers. Not only in education, but in dynamizing the economy of the small community. I think that, of course, this can be a permanent state policy that give and fish away. But a lot of them are already graduating, and as I said before, they already have become micro and small entrepreneurs to generate income, which in turn are invested in education. I will stop here.
Okay. So I also, is Romulo available to answer the question as well? Because the situation in Brazil is different than the situation in Peru in the sense that, as Romulo talked about in the statement, Brazil had a larger infrastructure to begin with. And with that larger infrastructure and greater coverage, some of the issues about providing the quality were less important. And so I'm curious in terms of, as Brazil was making the decision, Brazil didn't have to think as much about changing the relative quality that was available. What was the thinking in terms of what was the behavior that was going to change? Was it more like in Peru, trying to increase the awareness in the community and the expectations on the community so that quality would improve? Or was it more trying to think about how to change behavior of the low-income family?
When we think about the attitudes of the families, we must consider that the program is the program in Latin America is present in 17 countries. In the whole planet, it's about 60 countries. And they are different, and the kind of problems we have about the family's attitude related to education. Even in the case of Brazil, when we have a very high coverage for adult education, we have 97% of all kids aged 7 to 14 years old are in the school. But we know that when they are, as I said, the age of 12 or 14, they start to change the attitude related to school, especially in the rural areas. In countries in the Middle East, for example, it has been very important for girls, especially in the secondary, because the girls should go to school by that. Many families are not happy with that. So the program has been important determinants for changing families' attitudes. About infrastructure, it's also important because we, as I said, the school needs to change, but it's not something easy to do. Because even when we have a kind of program like Bolsa Familia, which is very strong stimulus in terms of to change families' attitude, but each school itself is not prepared to change. For example, in many cases, the personnel in the school are not receiving more, or having more kids in the class. So as a consequence, it's not necessarily something that you will easily change. So the point is to combine families' attitudes, and it will be very important, especially for girls' education. However, I know that it's not important in Latin America. We don't have fortunately this kind of difficulty. And also change the school. But it's also important, as Eric mentioned, to combine all kinds of interventions, especially programs watering in the school. It's something that's not common in one place. It's a problem in many places, including in Latin America, including in Brazil, where not necessarily is the kind of commodity we have in the school. So, if we see that the families are demanding more in better service, because it is part of the process as well, because we are now sending kids to school and the families are totally worried about many things. And on the other hand, the school is also changing in the way they observe the conditional cash transfer. And sometimes they are starting to demand the protection for kids that are not receiving the benefit. It has happened in, as I said, in 17 different countries in Latin America. So it has been interesting for changing families' attitudes and also for changing the way the state relates to its people. Thank you.
One of the things that has been also discussed, in the academic literature is discussing about the role of the conditions.
Oh, the camera?
Oh, it's okay. So one of the things that's been discussed in the academic literature is also the role of conditional versus unconditional transfers. Because one of the criticisms sometimes is that by making the transfers conditional, we're having families take certain activities. Now, I think most of the people who are probably on the phone feel like those activities are good for them, but there's certainly some criticism that perhaps families know best how to spend their money and what investments they need to make that will improve their happiness and station the most. And I'm wondering if either of the panelists would like to talk about, the role of the conditions versus the unconditional transfers, and whether there was any evidence or they think that what their thoughts are if the money were just provided as a lump sum subsidy, how the results would have changed relative to what we saw.
Sorry, is there a question for home loan or again?
Well, why don't we start with home loan, then we'll move to Alejandro. So.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can, but
But you're not sure if I can keep going.
yeah.
Okay, let's try this way, or otherwise we come back to the phone. What? Okay, again. Can I go?
Yes.
Okay. So this expenditure of the families, if we put out the determinants, we cannot talk about the program because if we think the program has changed and everything, that's not true. It depends that if programs they are matching with other determinants. I think the kind of has been very important, really.
Let's change okay. So the question is this, because one family is changing the attitudes, not just because of the program. In some way, the programs are matching with other determinants. I think the decline in fertility has been really important, we believe that the families are changing procedures, including the way they share food availability, the way they think about the future of the children in terms of health, in terms of education. So when a problem like that comes, it immediately finds availability of the family for changing. Think at least of Honduras, which here there is a very high level of fertility, different from many countries in South America, for example, or in other countries in many parts. But in the case of the little country in Central America, in that stage, when they have a higher fertility rate, in some way the farmers are expecting to decline, to change their attitude in terms of fertility. So I think demographic change has been very important in the way the family are behaving. And the program, in some way, has found a good connection with the kind of expectation of the family. We tested in Brazil the exploration of food consumption. And we found people like to more vegetables, more fruits. They do what's considered a health diet. If they have access to do that, if they have the opportunity to have a budget, family budget increase in order to accommodate that aspiration, they change. So I think it's a combination. It's not just the program itself is strong enough to change immediately and suddenly many things. But if it finds medical environment, so it produces a quick change.
Okay.
Thank you.
President Toledo, do you want to respond as well? So, President Toledo, would you like to respond as well to the question about whether the unconditional transfers could have the same impact as the conditional transfers used to have?
Did you want me to comment on that?
Yes, please.
Well, I think that one issue is confronting extreme poverty, and for that it might make more sense to just transfer lump sum to the poor. But if you want to have an impact of this condition transfer in education, we have found that the conditions did have an impact in education. The crucial issue is women. Women can make a better use of the money received for the education of the kids. Two, if we put the conditions of vaccination, you reduce the probabilities of the children getting sick. The state saves more money by curing those kids who are not vaccinated. By providing the infrastructure, you are also collaborating with the conditions. And so I'm of the opinion, looking at the results, at least at experience in Peru, is that by doing the condition transfer, you are obliging the poor women to comply with them, the prenatal checkups, the postnatal checkups, the vaccination, and taking the kids to the school. You're really forcing them, because the magnitude of their needs of the extreme poor are such that they can spend the money in anything else. And I think that I think that you will share with me that the most effective weapon that one can have to fight poverty is through education. But education needs to be accompanied by all the variables I mentioned before that makes education to be a success story with the needed potable water, sanitation, healthcare, and oblige them. I'm not too inclined to give fish away to the poor, but give them the right to learn how to fish by putting these conditions to them. And we have now seen that they are 15, 16 years old, and they're continuing in a high school. Now, the quality of education is another issue, and which is a crucial one, and that has to do a lot with the quality of education of the teachers. That has to do a lot with the availability of the schools, with all the service, in order for the teachers to meet the tasks. So, Professor Benner, I'm on the light of the experience that we have been following, and we are tracking it so far. We are following year by year what those kids are doing. We have been able to identify the cohort of groups and doing the following up to see where are they ending up now. Have they dropped at the school? Are they continuing in high school? We're trying to measure the quality of education. But that, again, as I said, it has to do a lot, I think, with the quality of the teaching. And then the professors has a question that need to be confronted.
Okay, now we can hear you.
This is a great answer, and one of the things I want to highlight in your, I really enjoy this answer, and one of the things that I like about the answer in particular is illustrating that as students have participated in this program, once the program, they are no longer eligible for the subsidies. Once their age is above the threshold that would allow them and their family to be eligible, we still see them making investments in education. And so I think that the analogy of the fish, teaching them to fish, is an important one, because we still see continued investments by these families after the conditions have been, and they're no longer eligible. One of the topics we're going to turn to questions here soon, but one of the topics that President Toledo has mentioned a couple of times is the role of the females, the role of the mothers in making those investments. And I was wondering if Romulo wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the Brazilian experience in terms of how do we think about the mothers in Brazil, and have they has played as much of a role as they have in Peru and really being the avenue directing investment into the children's health and education. So Home Alone, I think we're going to go directly to the cell phone this time, so that in the interest of time here. So I think we've got you in 5 seconds or so.
Oi, Ron. Ok, agora todo mundo te ouve.
Okay. Well, seeing you leading the family in terms of the social protection has been important in many countries. Actually, in the case of Latin America, all 17 countries, we have an incredible majority of the women in the position of reference of the family. In the case of Brazil, it's 92%. I think that we can describe why they are better in managing the resources for family. Because in contemporary families, we have the relationship with the mother and the kids in the case of divorce or any changing partners. Usually, the kids remain with the mother. It's an important thing. Other thing, in terms of focusing on the children's necessity, in so many studies has been, there's a lot of evidence that the mothers care more in terms of about health, education, nutrition, and other issues that are related to the programs. Another thing, we are changing the perception of the mother within the family. Because now, because they have cash, they can receive every month, so they can plan. And they change the status inside the community, because now they can buy, they can pay, they are a better consumer, they are a stronger consumer. So there's a change in the status inside the family and inside the community. And it has, in some way, it's giving some power to the woman inside the family, and it has been also important for the benefit of the children. So we had also seen in different parts of other continents, in Africa, including in the Middle East, it has been also very important for changing the role of the women inside the family and outside in the community. Thank you.
Okay. So there's 2 small points that I want to make that I think both of our panelists have actually touched on. I want to just make these points very briefly because we're to the point where we'd like to actually take some questions from the audience and bring those in. But the 2 points that I want to accentuate that they've made is one about the cost-benefit analysis. Most of the studies that we have out so far have suggested, I think all of the panelists have discussed different benefits that have happened, both in terms of health and education and in reduction of poverty. Most of our evidence trying to look back and see what that additional revenue was generated suggests that the benefits far exceed the cost. We have to have a significant increase. I think the best estimate is something like a 60% increase in cost in order to offset the benefits that we're receiving. So that's one piece of evidence I want to put out there just in terms of a fact before we go to the questions. The second one that I want to talk just briefly about is both of them have alluded to the fact that this may not be the right strategy for every family. That there are a lot of families for whom the conditional cash transfer program really does affect them and they take that up. We have a lot of families who don't. We have the very poorest of the poor and to some extent those people who are right close to the poverty line, but particularly those people who are the very poorest of the poor, those families for one reason or another are not taking it up. And one of the things that, as we talk about conditional cash transfers, we have seen tremendous effects in those people who've taken it up. And one of the challenges going forward is both thinking about strategies for those families not taking up, either to incorporate them into the program or to find other programs that empower them to overcome whatever barriers are in their lives. So I think we're going to go ahead at this point. I know we have at least one question from the audience ready, and if you have other questions you'd like to submit, please go ahead and do this for the link. Raquel, do you want to read the question for us?
Is there any questions here?
Well, we're getting ready to one question online. We have one question here in the audience at Stanford, and we'll get that question now. So why don't we go with the first question?
Sure. I want to go. I think it's fine. You can hear. Yeah. So I want to go back to Eric's point on if infrastructure is in place. Why are there any differences between Peru and Brazil, and what happens? Why are there families that are not necessarily taking up on the conditional cash transfers? And one thing I want to say is that first, Peru had some infrastructure, and the infrastructure in Peru, although it was in place, did not have the credibility. Because during the years of Fujimori, one of his biggest policies was to build schools. So there was infrastructure in place, but there was no credibility of the institutions. And that, to some extent, is true in Brazil as well, because the quality of the schools in rural areas is so poor, and communities do not have the clear idea of future opportunities. If they have primary schools in their cities, they don't have secondary schools. If they have secondary schools, they don't have a chance of going to higher education, university, or even professional training. So in addition to quality, I think it's important for us to talk about the credibility of institutions. And this is maybe something that relates to your infrastructure point. So my question is, can we say that the conditional cash transfers or that government policies have improved the credibility of the institutions or the credibility of the educational system in any of these countries?
Okay, so hopefully that came through. So President Toledo, why don't we start with you? Can you talk a little bit about the role of the conditional cash transfer program, how it may have affected the credibility of the government's provision, particularly of education? And then perhaps a little bit more on why some families do not participate in the program, even though they might actually have infrastructure available to them, and how we think about them.
Let me pick up, first of all, your point, Professor Vinegar, about cost-benefit analysis. The fact that the community receives an amount of money, cumulative. The young people who are now 16, 17 are beginning to administer the agricultural production of their families and take the products to the market in order to increase their income. So you already see that you have an administrator. One can question the quality, but you already have a woman or a young boy who is administering the production of potatoes, corn, wheat that the family produce. Secondly, by having that amount of money in the community, they are getting together to initiate a micro-entrepreneurship, and they are graduating from the cash transfer program. Many of them are no longer in the program. And third, the question about credibility. It is absolutely crucial that the program is not politicized, that it has a board of people who have the credibility to supervise and to implement the program with transparency. Because if the program is made with a political purpose of saying we will transfer the cash transfer, but you will belong to a given political party in Brazil or in Peru, then the merits of the program diminishes considerably. Now, the third point is that the infrastructure that the poor communities need to have to comply with the conditions that we require from them, that obliges the governments to build a good quality of school, a good quality of medical service, a good quality of potable water. Because otherwise we will fall into a trap. Kids who bring water that is not potable, they get sick of the stomach, they don't go to school, they perform very poorly, and so we are really wasting the money. So far, however, the World Bank has done a study of all cash transfer programs in Latin America, and the results indicate that it has had a significant impact in poverty reduction and improving the education of those communities. I do admit that the quality of education is an issue that needs to deal with, because the differences between rural and urban quality of education continues to be very significant and a disadvantage for the rural education. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I think can we squeeze in one more question before we need to end here?
Yeah.
And there's one online question, and Raquel, would you read that online question?
Yes, sure.
And why don't we have Homo be ready to respond to the question?
Yeah. Can you come closer because the microphone is...
Okay, thanks everyone. So I just have a question of Clarissa, which is from Bitcoin Center for Demography and Global Human Capital. The question is for Romulo Paz de Souza and could be also answered by Alejandro. So impact evaluation shows that CPT programs have a positive impact in the enrollment and in the attendance ratio for those disadvantaged children. But how to keep them moving further on their educational trajectory? How would the program in fact change their educational disadvantage once they are more likely to attend the lower quality education schools? Thank you.
Trying to wrapping up the three questions. The first one, conditional cash transfer are cheap programs. If you look at the case of Brazil, it's not for 6% of the GDP. Even if it's a quite amount of money, because in Brazil it's 10 billion American dollars per year. But considering you have also the GDP, so it's, as I said, it's a small part of the GDP. In the case of other Latin American countries, it's about maximally 1.4 of the GDP for countries that have a very low GDP. So the way we can transfer money, you can hitting up the economy, bottom up, stimulating economic activity in the small cities, small areas, very far from parts of the economy. They are much more dynamic. And also has stimulated the development of small business because we now have a lot of consumers ready to pay. So it's easier to go that way than go another way in order to stimulate the economy in the very small areas, in very remote areas. The problem is we must understand two things about the conditional cash transfer. Many countries emphasize the service. Other countries emphasize the cash transfer itself, considering that it's a right to have the minimum, social minimum, kind of minimum wage in terms of social rights. They have to be able to buy foods and other things. In the case of Brazil, The main aspect is the cash transfer. The service is part of the process that is not related to the program itself. I mean, we have a Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health. They are stimulated in order to provide that service, but not necessarily they will change because of the program. It depends on other factors. One important factor is how to keep professionals in the rural areas. It's hard to maintain doctors there. It's hard to maintain teachers there, and it is a big problem. Even for Brazil, it's a very urbanized country. You have 82% of the population living in rural areas. It is very hard to keep the professionals in the rural areas. So we cannot claim that for the conditional cash transfer. It depends on a much more complex process in the social policy, because it's far more easier to transfer cash rather than to organize service. And you know very well also. So in relation to the second question, not necessarily the program will change the behavior of the institution in terms of education in order to provide the service. It depends on much more aspects. The conditional cash transfer can help in order that they can make the families demand more. They can point out problems that are happening in the rural areas, as you already mentioned, but also in the urban areas, in the small cities. Because there are big problems related to the quality of the service, both education and health. So I think that the point is, not necessarily the institution will increase their credibility because the program has a limit. The point is how to change the attitude of the families. We have also collateral gains because the institution has to change itself. But we must understand the limits of the program. The program is not designed to improve education, but to change the family attitude related to education. The educational policy has to do with its job. Thank you.
So we want to thank everybody who's participated in the webinar. We apologize for some of the technical difficulties that we had. And just to sum, I mean, we have barely started to talk about CCTs. I appreciate the discussions, and I appreciate, and hopefully we've raised curiosity about some of these programs, or tried to provide some perspective about how these, we could have gone on for hours and hours talking about different aspects. We're grateful for those presenters for taking time out of their day to come and to answer our questions and to talk to us about this. And we thank you for your time and for your energies logging in and participating in the program. And we hope that as we move forward with this series, that we can hopefully return to this topic again and try to have a little bit less technical difficulties, but perhaps a little more participation and bringing some more of the questions and your questions. Again, we thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Thank you very much, Eric. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming.